Hey guys and gals, Effie here. Today I want to talk to you about The Cyborg Tinkerer by Meg LaTorre. We'll talk about some things that I liked, a few things that I didn't, and then towards the end we'll talk about some of the controversy surrounding Meg LaTorre and her YouTube channel, iWriterly. Of course, as always, I'll do a quick recap at the end, so if you're looking to avoid spoilers, just hit the recap prompt down at the bottom and just fast forward right to the end. In the vein of full disclosure, I purchased this book from Amazon with my own money for $16.63 US. I do not know the author. I have not been contacted by her or any of her agents or representatives. This is my own opinion, unsolicited. Here we go. And before we get too much further into it, I just want to be absolutely clear. I am talking about her book. I am not critiquing the author herself. So I was not a big fan of this book, and there's a lot of things in it that I think were badly done. That does not mean that I don't think that Meg LaTorre has potential as a writer. It does not mean that I think she's a bad person. So just because we don't like somebody's art doesn't mean we don't like them as a person. So make sure that you're not sending hate her way or bad-mouthing her on the internet. Nobody deserves that kind of harassment. She worked hard on this, and I want to make sure that we're all respectful of that. The Cyborg Tinkerer was billed originally as a steampunk space opera, and then just before release, after getting feedback from some of her beta readers and her critique partners, the author changed it to be advertised more as a romance with steampunk space elements, and I think that that was appropriate. It's definitely a romance-driven plot rather than an adventure-driven plot, which is kind of unfortunate because the adventure is definitely the better part of the book, but we'll get more into that in a minute. The story follows Gwendolyn Grimm, a ship's tinker with a brain tumor. She decides that she's going to die on this sort of junk moon, and while she's there waiting to die, she learns that there's a cyborg circus in town. Now, cyborgs have been outlawed by the Emperor years ago, and so the cyborg circus is kind of this illicit affair. Gwen decides she's going to go to the circus, and while she's there, the police raid, the federals raid, and she gets arrested. So she's in jail. She's in jail awaiting a death sentence, and a very dapper lord comes in and offers her a contract. He says, "I can get rid of your brain tumor if you sign a 13-year contract to work for me." What she didn't know at the time was work for me meant work for the cyborg circus. He turned out to be the ringmaster, and that is how Gwen got rid of her brain tumor. It was replaced with a cyborg implant, and she became the cyborg tinkerer for this circus. The problem is what she signed up for is not really what she got. The owner of the circus is about to change everything. She's going to cull the acts from 50 down to 10, and then they're going to go and present themselves to the emperor because they've been invited to the palace, which sounds great. The problem is all of these people have had these cyborg surgeries illegally. So the fact that they have the implants is illegal, and the mistress won't let them leave the circus with their implants because it implicates her in the crimes. So everybody who gets cut winds up having their implants torn out of them, and because Gwen is the cyborg tinkerer, she's the one who has to do it. A lot of these people rely on those implants to live, so she's basically forced to murder a bunch of people by ripping out these implants, and she's sort of forced to choose between saving herself or doing the right thing. And I thought that that dynamic was really interesting, but it should have been the main focus of the story, and it really wasn't. The overall structure of the book is about 125,000 words broken up into 42 short, punchy chapters, which is ideal for those who don't have a lot of time to sit and read in long spells, or for people who have a hard time paying attention for long periods of time. So the structure of the book I really liked. I thought that it was very convenient to just pick it up and read a chapter over, 5 or 10 minutes and then be able to put it down and go do something else. Okay, let's talk about some things that were done well in the book. There is a broad cast of characters with all different body types and skin tones, and there doesn't seem to be any sort of racism or bigotry associated with gender or ethnicity, and I thought that that was great. It's a futuristic story, and in theory, humanity will have evolved by that point to sort of leave all of that junk behind us. I liked the wide-eyed, hopeful approach the author took to the future. I like that things like Homosexuality were approached very openly. The characters express preferences for male or female, and nobody bats an eye. It's just kind of accepted as par for the course. And I liked that. I liked that hopeful view of the future. Another thing that was just sort of presented as everyday occurrence was the trans character Marzana. So here's Marzana's introduction. Marzana had once been a man named Jared, but her gender and sexuality were as fluid as the waters beneath them. Over time, she'd taken on a new name. That's it. There's no pulling her out into the spotlight to inspect her. There's no weirdness or awkwardness about it. It's just acceptance for the character as she is, for who she is. And I really liked that. I like the concept of normalizing trans characters. I like the concept of normalizing gay characters. They're just people in the story. While we're on the topic of sexuality, let's talk about the poly arc that is in the book. While I appreciate the author's attempt at normalizing different kinds of love, I think she missed the mark on this one. Both of the main characters' love interests express feelings of jealousy and discomfort when she shows interest in other people. So they are telling her, look, I'm built for monogamy. And she just kind of ignores that. And then by the end of the book, they both decide that they're so in love with her that they're willing to accept sharing her. And that's just not how healthy poly relationships are built. There is a scene at the end where they sort of negotiate the parameters of this polyamorous relationship, and while I appreciate that she included that, the fact that she didn't respect those characters saying, I'm not interested in sharing you, that to me is just as important as respecting somebody saying, I'm not into men or I'm not into women. We need to take people at their word and just accept that they know themselves better than we do. While we're on the topic, let's talk about what were, for the most part, pretty gratuitous and unnecessary sex scenes and curse words. Everybody in the book is really, really thirsty, and the sex scenes that are included are extremely graphic. They're not really written in a romantic way so much as like an attempt to be steamy. The problem is that they don't really forward character development and they don't really serve the plot, so they're just kind of spackled on almost as an afterthought. It didn't make any sense to me. There's a lot of extra raunch in there that just seemed entirely unnecessary. There's also a lot of gratuitous cursing that doesn't make a lot of sense. Now, that doesn't mean all the cursing in the book doesn't make sense. Our main character, Gwendolyn Grimm, for example, she's been living on a ship for 5 years, she's been around a bunch of sailors, so she's a coarse woman in general, and it makes sense that her language would be a bit rough. That's fine, I have no problem with that. It was also used well to contrast her from Rora's wide-eyed innocence, for example, or Bastion's sort of stiff formality. The problem is, it wasn't just characters that were cursing, and although there were characters that cursed in a way that didn't make sense, it's also the narrator that kind of curses, and I can't really tell when I'm reading it if we're meant to be sort of in Gwen's mind, because she kind of waffles back and forth between using italics to indicate we're in Gwen's thoughts and just sort of writing it regularly. So you never really know if you're reading it from the narrator's perspective or if you're reading it from Gwen's perspective. And so there's some random narration cursing that's, one, not appropriately used in the sentence, so it's really awkward, and two, feels really out of place because what kind of narrator just randomly curses at the reader? Overall, I just don't feel like the language flowed smoothly. Ian from Kirkpatrick did a really interesting reading of this and sort of highlighted some of the awkward dialogue, in particular the cuss words, so I've linked their video down below. In general, most of the swearing and sex scenes seemed like they were sort of added on as an afterthought, like somebody read it and realized, oh, this is a young adult novel, let's spice it up and make it more grown-up by adding some sex and some swearing, and sex scenes and swear words don't make an adult novel, they just make a young adult novel with sex scenes and swear words. Greener Side of Sam actually did a really good job of explaining why that's the case, so I've linked her video down below as well. There are a lot of things in this book that make it feel like it was written for a younger audience, and then the cursing and swear words were added on as an afterthought to try to make it feel more grown-up. There's a ton of YA tropes that are really easy to pick out, so I'm using J.M. Tuckerman's list from her blog, and of course I've linked her blog down below. Let's go through a few of those tropes and where they are in the novel. Trope number 1, the story features an unqualified protagonist succeeding over a qualified antagonist. That is definitely the theme of the first half of the book. Gwendolyn Grimm, as we discussed, is not a qualified cyborg tinkerer. She's a ship's tinkerer, and they are not the same thing. There's one point in the book early on where she winds up performing surgery on 52 people in a single night. 52 cyborg implants she removes. That means she's taking off people's arms, their feet, their hands, parts of their head, parts of their body, things under their skin. And there's never a situation where she gets to a part that's bleeding and she can't get it to stop. Nobody dies in the entire 52 people she operates in that first night. Now, this happens several more times and people do start dying, but one, what the hell kind of doctor can perform 52 surgeries in a night? And two, how does somebody with no medical experience do that without killing anybody? It just doesn't make sense. In contrast, the mistress, who is the owner of the circus and the one that's having all of this done, is the person who developed cyborg technology. You know, she's an incredible surgeon and an excellent scientist, and although she's cruel, you know, she knows what she's doing. And somehow Gwendolyn Grimm, who has no programming experience, no coding experience, no cyborg experience at all, is somehow able to accidentally override the malicious coding that the mistress puts into the cyborgs. And I can see you accidentally deleting things and making them brain dead, but overriding her coding just didn't make a lot of sense. Trope number 2, the story contains oversimplified characterizations. In my opinion, the mistress is written sort of as an old school mustache twirling villain. She doesn't really have any voice or depth, and the reason that she's doing the horrible things that she's doing don't make a lot of sense. On balance, it's just not level, right? Like, no sane, logical person would think in this way. And maybe she's not meant to be sane, or maybe she's not meant to be logical, but because she's never really given a voice and we never get to see anything from her perspective, it all just comes off as very like, oh, I need a bad guy, let's just write this in. Trope number 3, the story includes love triangles, and we've already discussed that when we talked about polyamory earlier. YA trope number 4, the story includes gullible martyrs. That is definitely applicable here. Most of the main character's problems are not because of the horrific things that she's forced to do in order to stay alive, but because she's sort of duped by her love interest. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. I can understand somebody being duped, but when you're in a situation where you're forced to literally murder dozens of people, the girl that you met and spent 2 hours with like 3 weeks ago is very far from your mind, and it doesn't make sense that that's the thing that's tearing her up rather than all this horrific bloodshed that she's forced to cause. Trope number 5, the story contains attractive characters who don't think they're attractive. One of the main character's love interests, called Bastion, doesn't really seem to understand why she would ever love him. He's the brooding bad boy. He's sort of this dark figure, and it's sort of this enemies to lovers thing, and all of those are very typical YA sort of tropes, right? He's also sort of shoehorned into this really clumsy Beauty and the Beast retelling, which doesn't really add anything to the story except for this really clumsy scene at the end where they all kind of take on Disney names. Trope number 6, insta-love without build-up. That happens quite a bit in this story. The main character falls in love with her female love interest pretty much instantly. They spend a couple hours together, and all of a sudden she just can't live without this woman, based solely on the fact that she's physically attractive. So mostly what we get out of this love interest is that she's really manipulative and really driven and really selfish, and we never really see any positive aspects of her personality. So we've got the main character falling hard for this girl just based on the fact that she has like beautiful mocha skin and nice curves, and that's not love. She also kind of creates for herself this sort of insta family at the end of the first night, after she's performed all of these surgeries and done all of these horrific things to all of these people. She sort of just decides that the cyborgs are her new family. That doesn't make any sense. She has nothing in common with these people. She doesn't know them. They have no similar interests other than the fact that they're all sort of trapped in contracts at the circus, and maybe that they're all cyborgs, but they don't even like her. So why she's decided that they're her family, and that term is thrown around so easily and so loosely that it has no meaning within the story. It's very ungrounded and very shallow, and I didn't like it. Trope number 7, royal realization. The main character and both of her love interests are all members of the social elite, and she only finds out about that when it is least convenient for her to find out about it. Trope number 8, instant mastery over undiscovered powers. We talked before about the main character sort of instantly mastering surgery and how she's able to perform 52 surgeries in a night, which would be impossible for anybody, even with the right training. And somehow nobody dies, and it just doesn't make any sense. You know, when you cut off somebody's arm, it bleeds. They're going to bleed out, and having the knowledge to identify where that's coming from and address it correctly, you know, basically she just presses some piece of hot metal to it and just scalds it shut. And that's not how bodies work, but somehow it works for Gwendolyn Grimm because she's amazing. Trope number 9, dead or otherwise absentee parents. The main character's parents are still alive, but like all cyborgs, she's forgotten them, right? So there's this thing in the coding, remember that malicious coding I mentioned earlier, where it just kind of wipes out their history so that all they have is the circus. And that's one of the mistress's ways of keeping them there. That concept was kind of subtly introduced, and I appreciated that, but it also removed anyone's reason for leaving. Normally in YA novels, parents are removed to sort of free the character up to do what they want, but because these characters are adults, that's just not necessary. And the parents being alive and being there and then remembering who they are would have given them some sort of exterior goal. It would have given them some sort of reason to want to run. Trope number 10, texting gone wrong. Okay, so technically there's no texting in the book, but there are plenty of situations where misunderstanding or miscommunication was used as a plot device to drive story. At one point, the main character's love interest jumps to the entirely unfounded conclusion that Gwendolyn Grimm knew about all the horrific things that were going to happen. She doesn't really have a reason for thinking this other than it allows us to drive a wedge between them so it's not all puppies and rainbows, but it just felt really immature. Beyond that, the character then went further to refuse medical treatment for 2 weeks because she was busy pouting like a child. And in the situation that they're in, that kind of thing could spell her death. You know, she needed to get her cyborg implant, her hand. She needed to have that worked on. And she knew it. And the only person who could do it was Gwen. And she refused to go see her and refused to get herself taken care of because she was mad at her after she'd only just met. It's not like they were friends, you know. Yeah, okay, she's hot, but you got bigger things to worry about here. Trope number 11, people believing the antagonist after their first attempt at explaining something. That definitely happens often in this book, but the two most notable things are the situation I described earlier with the love interest. Gwen eventually just goes to see her and is like, oh, I didn't know. And the girl just believes her. There's no real explanation about it. There's no sort of tentative trust thing going on. She just walks in and is like, oh, I didn't know about this. And the girl's like, oh, I trust you. And that was it. It was just instantly resolved, right? There's another situation at the end of the book where the mistress is just crazy, right? Like her hair's all flying all over the place. She's brought in all of these soldiers to sort of attack the emperor. So she's just kind of throwing herself at this door, screaming about this emperor that killed her family, right? Which, of course, she's upset about, but Gwen's just like, well, you know, you made your own family by creating all these cyborgs. And Mistress is like, oh, you know, that's true. And she just kind of follows her out, like you've done all this work to assault this man. You've done all of this work to sort of get this emperor dead. And now you're just gonna give up because you have a new family and it never occurred to you in all of the years that you've been with these people that they might have some value other than just as tools? Really? You needed Gwen to tell you that? Trope number 11, in order to seem fierce and warrior-like, girls have to hate dresses and all things girly. The main character is laid out as an absolute badass, and we're told several times that she hates wearing dresses, and she hates having her hair done, and she hates wearing jewelry, and although that's fine, she also insists that she only wears her tinkerer boots, so they put her in this ball gown, and she just kind of clomps around in her tinkerer boots like a Clydesdale and steps on people's feet in protest of being forced to wear a dress, and I just can't see any grown person acting that way. But a teenager definitely would. Overall, the character's behavior and reaction to things just felt really immature. Conflicts between the characters felt really shallow and childish. It was all very sort of high school drama, and that made it impossible for me to relate to them. However, I'm a 40-year-old woman. I'm pretty far removed from those sort of late teens, early 20s emotional crises that seem to happen, right? So maybe if I were younger, I would find them more relatable. Miss Sam from the YouTube channel Miss Hashmi, for example, said that she thought that the characters felt really adult. So, maybe you can relate to them and maybe I just didn't. And that's okay. We're allowed to have different tastes and we're allowed to read characters in different ways. I also want to point out that none of these tropes are inherently bad things. They're used in young adult novels because they speak to a younger audience. Young people need stories of success and triumph, even though it's easily obtained, because it inspires them to reach for things that may otherwise feel out of reach. It inspires them towards adventure and towards risk-taking in a way that is healthy and needs to be nurtured in young people. The problem is, as we age, stories of unearned success feel really shallow, and we just can't relate to them in the same way. This book could easily have been cleaned up of all its unnecessary sex and cursing and then marketed to teens or young adults as a sci-fi action adventure with a little romance thrown in, and I don't know that I'll ever understand why it wasn't. There are other things within the book that really bothered me, things that are personal pet peeves, like injuries, for example, that didn't actually hinder the character. At one point, Gwen's leg is broken, somebody breaks her leg, and then she's dancing and climbing on boxes. She gets shot and then she's like immediately in a threesome after. And those kind of unsubstantial injuries, those injuries that should impact the story and then don't, feel very sort of cartoon superhero to me, and that also makes it feel like it's meant for a younger audience. There's also this sort of random cobbling together of sci-fi elements and fantasy. The book was marketed as a steampunk in space romance, and although there are elements of steampunk, it's certainly not a prevalent part of the story. There's castles and dragons, and the overlaying of them just did not feel smooth. There's also some more advanced technology, like digital technology, that felt really out of place, and Scribbling Cat did a pretty good job of explaining that, so I've linked her video down below. I also felt like the entire last third of the book, the section where you go to the Emperor's palace and there's all this conflict with him and his army, it felt really unnecessary and it felt really rushed. The main story should have been that internal conflict with Gwendolyn Grimm, and it just wasn't, so I felt like most of the book was misfocused, and that's how we wound up on this other planet. So it all just felt out of place and like there was a better ending to the book and we just didn't get to see it. The thing is, it's not my book. That's the way that Meg LaTorre decided to write the ending. It's her book. She can write the ending however she wants. I don't have to like it. Since we're already talking about the author, I don't feel like this would be a complete review without talking about Meg LaTorre and her YouTube channel iWriterly. Most of her videos on YouTube are her offering very basic, beginner writing advice to new authors and sort of inspiring people to get words. Shortly after her book was released, she was accused of botting 5-star reviews on Goodreads. Now, Meg has addressed this in a Twitter thread, and I'll go ahead and make sure that that's on the screen for you, but she vehemently denies using bots, and she's gone further to ask her fans to not create alt accounts, to boost her ratings, to make sure that everything is, on the up and up. She said if anybody has created alt accounts, she asked them to remove the reviews and delete them. She said very clearly that she wants her reviews to be real. She wants them to be genuine. She wants her book to stand on its own, not to be artificially inflated. And I don't know what more anybody could ask of her than that. I'm concerned that people are looking at a review spike and believing that because it's a bad book or that they didn't like it, that nobody's gonna like it. And that's just not the case. People who are looking for that really raunchy, in-your-face sort of sex, they might really like it. I know that the book was picked up by a book club for a Steamathon or something, and that could explain it. Or it could be some other explanation. Like I said, I don't know the back end of Goodreads that well. And I have a feeling that the people who are accusing her of botting don't really either. Another issue that people seem to have with Meg LaTorre is that she claims to have worked for a literary agent, and then she offers writing advice on YouTube based on her expertise that she gained in that position. And a lot of people don't seem to understand how she could have had all that experience and then somehow released what is arguably not a very good book. Just to ensure that everything in this video is 100% factual and that I'm not spreading bad information, I did do a little digging online, and I was able to find a literary agent that's associated with Meg LaTorre. I reached out to them and they confirmed that yes, in fact, she had worked with them, that she left on her own terms, just as she claims to have done in her videos, and everything seemed to be very amicable between them. The thing is, just because you know how something works doesn't mean you're able to do it yourself. So I could sit and memorize an anatomy book. I could learn all the bones in the body and where all the organs are and how they work and learn all about the blood vessels and the nerves and everything like that. That doesn't mean I can turn around and go perform surgery, right? So having knowledge is one thing, and being able to apply it is a different skill entirely. It takes practice, it takes time, and she hasn't really been given the time to develop it. I am not convinced that Meg LaTorre's book would have been as badly reviewed as it was if she hadn't had the presence on authortube that she does, right? If people didn't know that she was offering writing advice based on this expertise that she has, I don't think they would have panned the book as badly as they did. Do I think that writing a bad book disqualifies Meg LaTorre from offering writing advice on YouTube? No. Her videos inspire new and aspiring authors to get words on the page. They make people feel like they really can be an author. They really can publish a book. They really can get their voice heard. And that has value within the community, even if she cannot execute all of the things that she recommends to her viewers. I do hope that despite the sour reception that the Cyborg Tinkerer received, that Meg LaTorre does continue to write. And I hope that someday she comes back to YouTube. I understand needing to take a break for mental health, but I hope that she's not discouraged to the point that she doesn't come back. I think she has value to the community, and I hope that we all have the grace to accept her when she decides to. Okay, quick recap for those of you who decided to skip to the end. Overall, I found the core concepts of the Cyborg Tinkerer to be really interesting. The sort of deadly competition where the main character has to choose between saving her own life and doing what she thinks is right. That to me was an interesting concept. To me, it wasn't as well executed as I would have liked. It seems like the author got distracted while she was writing the book and then sort of diverged from what could have been a really incredible story about internal conflict and doing the right thing, even if it hurts. And she sort of got distracted by a love story that wasn't really that great to begin with. In general, I feel like the characters, although they were a very diverse cast, felt really immature, and overall the book felt like it was written for a young adult audience, and then at the end they just sort of slathered on a bunch of sex scenes and slurs and curse words, and it just felt really unnecessary. In my opinion, the book should have been marketed to teens or young adults, and they should have left all of that out. There were also some sentence structure and dialogue issues that didn't get caught in editing, and that overall made the book feel kind of unpolished. Overall, I feel like the Cyborg Tinkerer had young adult themes and characters, and the overuse of sex scenes and swear words really detracted from my enjoyment of it. But what I find gratuitous, you might find steamy. Just because I didn't like this book doesn't mean that you won't. For me, it doesn't really have a place on my bookshelf, so I will be giving away this copy of the Cyborg Tinkerer. It is a used book. I have read it, so there might be some smudges on the cover, fingerprints, and whatnot. There might be a little wear on the pages, although this one's pretty clean. It was new when I got it. So if you are interested in receiving this copy of this book, you can sign up for that at effywritesbooks.com. Just sign up for the newsletter. I promise I will not spam you, and I will never sell or give away your information to anyone else. It's just for my personal use, specifically so that I have a means of communicating with. As with all book giveaways, I will cover shipping in the US, but if you live overseas, you're going to need to cover your own shipping. If you have a book you'd like for me to read, feel free to recommend it on Twitter or Facebook, or you can get a hold of me in Discord. All of my contact information is down below. If you want to buy me a book that I'm already interested in, I do have an Amazon wish list down there. You can also pick up coffee or chocolate or something like that if that's what you're into. If you found this video helpful or informative, or you just like the way that I present information, please consider giving it a like and subscribing. Of course, if you want to be notified when I produce new videos, hit the bell. Thank you so much for watching. Have an excellent day, and I'll see you next time.